You're listening to The Nocturnist, Black Voices in Healthcare. I'm Ashley McMullen. I cannot believe it is already September. The pandemic is still ongoing, and we've borne witness to new tragedies while recognizing so many more that go unseen. And yet, we're still here as Americans, as healthcare workers, as a dynamic community of Black people, loving ourselves, loving each other, and envisioning a future filled with hope. Putting together this series over the last several weeks has been life-giving for me. The joy of building this family, the sense of home in each episode, and the strength and connections that come from stopping and listening to each other's stories. 2 weeks ago, we wrapped up the storytelling portion of this series. Last week, I sat down with our extraordinary executive producer, Dr. Kimberly Manning. I hope you guys enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Here's episode 10. Well, good morning. Dr. Kimberly Manning here live with me. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. I'm feeling great, living my best life out here in the ATL.
Yeah, I can't wrap my head around the fact that it's been 3 months since we started this project and about 3 months since the murder of George Floyd. I'm wondering, just at this point, looking back, how did this project unfold for you, or what was your trajectory in getting on board and what it's meant for you since then?
Well, you know that we kind of started a friendship before this came along. I was so lucky back in, what was that, 2019?
September 2019.
Yes, where I had the chance to come and visit as a visiting professor at UCSF. And among the meetings that I got was this dynamic, magnetic Black woman who comes strolling in with a backpack on.
Oh, yeah.
And this explosion of natural hair telling me about all the dope things she was up to. And, I just remember the day very well and us going out for coffee and all that. And so Emily Silverman and I had met a few times before. And when she reached out to me, pretty much she had me at Ashley. Pretty much. She was like, and Ashley, I was like, I want to do it. I want to do it. So, yeah, I was all in.
I also love thinking about that time when we met. Mm-hmm. I was wearing a dress that day. It's probably the only day I've ever worn a dress to work. So I just wanted to point that out, that I was actually going somewhere afterwards, but that was partly for you. But yeah, so similarly, having Emily as this mutual connection, as well as us having that history, it is kind of beautiful how this unfolded on the backside of so much pain. Thinking about that first episode, I gotta say, I remember when we first put the cut together and I heard your opening story and I just listened to it over and over and over again because you articulated so well just the visceral response to not just George Floyd, but how his story connects historically with so much that has been witnessed over generations, particularly for you having been present during the Rodney King murder. And I don't know, can you maybe talk a little bit about what that process was like for you recording that piece?
So I think the whole point of that was just recognizing that this is just not new, because people are kind of talking about it now and it's caused more people to rally than have in the past. I just thought it was a chance to say, hey, this is not anything new. This has been going on for as long as I can remember. I remember being a freshman in college in 1989 and watching the Central Park Five go to prison. And so you could just tell the story over and over. For every milestone that I've had in my life, it aligns with some pivotal thing happening to a Black body. When Rodney King was beaten, it was the first time something like that got caught on film, besides historic lynchings, which were made celebratory back in the day. But, it was just good to talk about it. And it actually makes me think about some of the other stories in that first episode where some of our storytellers more than one. Even some of the clips that were included and some of the amazing clips that we weren't able to fit in talked about this idea of what do you do with that information when it comes to you? Do you look at it? For me, as you know, I look. One, because I want to individualize that person. I want to know what happened. And I actually want to be disturbed. But everybody doesn't feel that way. And what I loved about one of the stories in particular, where one of our storytellers asked her sister if she should look, and her sister said, don't. I thought a lot about that and about how important it is for us to sort of respect the way that each of us feels in this space. So I'm curious to know, how do you feel, Ash, about these videos? Do you look?
I have a hard time looking. It's just such a strong emotional reaction. And particularly like if I'm scrolling through something at work, like I know I can't look then. It requires me to find the emotional bandwidth to do it. Because for me, like, it's not just, oh, here's another one. This was a human being. This was a father, a son. I am actively having to just grapple with the anger and keeping it at bay so it doesn't turn into hatred. And I think I have to be very mindful about how I consume these things and also the rhetoric that happens afterwards, because it impedes my ability to maintain hope.
Yeah. One of our storytellers had me thinking a lot about how our unique vantage points shape the way that we grieve in this time. For me, a cishet Black woman who's married to a Black man and who has two Black sons who are in this sort of space where they're no longer considered innocents anymore. So as a mom and as a wife, I worry about them, but I'm not a Black man. One of our storytellers who's a Black man, and the raw pain in his voice as he spoke of how he felt when he heard about George Floyd and his exhaustion and how tired he is. It gave me sort of a unique empathy, I think, because I think I've just been so nestled in my space of, Black mama bear on the hind legs. I guess I just appreciated the opportunity to really step inside of what it is like to be the targeted. You know what I mean? I'm targeted adjacent. And don't get me wrong, we do know that Black women are targeted, but just thinking about Black men and the target on them and what it's like to walk in that space, I really appreciated the vulnerability that our colleague offered us in that moment.
Yeah.
And just to think that, with all that, the brother got to go back to work, and do all the stuff everybody else has to do. Probably got a paper rejected just like me.
Yeah. It's the beauty of storytelling that does allow that proximity to people's experiences and really challenges us to think outside of the narratives that we've cultivated about ourselves and the world, and really just dig a lot deeper into this well of empathy that this moment really begs for.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when we were planning our episodes and trying to figure out how to maybe shape out some themes and where to go next. And you brought up making sure that we shed light on the aspects of joy, particularly in this moment of pain and reckoning.
Mm-hmm.
Would you walk me back through why this was so important to have that episode?
Yeah, I think in this time with so much pain, everybody is slow singing and flower bringing when it comes to Black folks, and it is really a very, very joyful thing to be Black. It is interesting because I don't know too many Black people right now who don't want to be Black. I have to say probably my favorite part of that Black joy had to do with when those bars came in on Lift Every Voice and Sing. It is just the most triumphant and beautiful and resilient and celebratory song. And it takes me back to being a little kid. So the fact that one of our contributors would record himself playing the piano and then the story that accompanied it, it was just sublime. I loved it. And it was just joy
Yes,
personified.
absolutely. I know for me, when I had left Chicago and moved to Houston, we were in a predominantly white suburb, and it took me a while to understand what Black joy was, even though I was little, and even though there wasn't a lot of overt racism, it's still very clear that my differences weren't to be celebrated. They were to be compensated for. And, as I got older and became more comfortable with myself and my identity, it just baffles me how much there is to celebrate that doesn't get celebrated. I mean, particularly for, those among us who were descendants from slaves, our whole legacy is about people who survived and didn't just survive, they created a whole culture that touches every corner of this earth. It's just, to me, it's just so dope to have that in my genes. I think
Yeah.
about, my mom and my grandmother and all these amazing Black women who've just, in spite of it all, just shined in every way. And I love that. I love being Black. It took me a minute, but I love this hair too, Gotta carve out that time to, do a good wash day, but it's really
Yeah. See, they
strengthened my
don't, they don't,
biceps.
they don't know about you doing your hair while we were having our planning sessions and our biweekly meetings. That's actually probably the highlight of all of our under the hood working was when
Right?
you were doing your hair in the middle of us discussing the episode. See, this was a real thing, and I'm like, of course, for years and years, Black women have been doing their hair while they're doing something else very important.
You gotta multitask. It's so real.
Yeah, it
I
is a
won't.
whole thing. Oh, you know what I loved too? I just thought about it. I thought about when our storyteller told about how, he rolled up into the SNMA conference and then opened the door, and it was like all these Black medical students grooving, doing the electric slide to bounce, 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 to the, just like
Yeah.
candy, right? And what's bugged out about that to me is that, when I went to medical school at Meharry, I went to the SNMA National Convention all but 3 out of my 4 years. And even in 1994, 95, and 96, when I went to that convention, it was the exact same thing that our storyteller described. It was equally lit. It was probably playing Cameo. And you know how Black folks, when they do the electric slide, you know how you first do it the one time the regular way, and then
Yeah, and
after
then you be
that
throwing
you
stuff
gotta
in.
put your flavor on it. You gotta throw up a leg, you gotta freeze on that thing. So I could hear all that, and then I loved how our team, our super dope creative team, just brought that sound into it, so that as you were
Yeah.
listening, you could just feel it, and it was so timeless. And I think that's what I love about that particular episode, because the Black joy that was threaded through there, even though we covered so much of the diaspora, right, in that episode. I mean, we're talking about people who whose families immigrated here, and people who are descendants of slaves, and just so many different aspects of it. But there's always this sort of common main line going through that everybody sees and hears and knows, and it's like, yep, yep, that's it. So for me, it was lift every voice and sing, and then of course the electric slide. But I mean, and I know it's people listening to this who do not identify as Black and who are like, I know I do the electric slide, but it's different. It's just like the electric slide with hot sauce on it. Woo, honey,
Yes,
that SNMA
man.
party. Woo.
I love. I'm just, I'm getting all the feels again from that episode, and we had another storyteller who described Black as transcendent, and when you find yourself in an all Black space, it just like the atmosphere just changes.
Oh yeah.
And she was talking about, the blackout nights that she would have with Black trainees.
Yep. I'm super happy that that story was included about going to see Black Panther.
Yeah.
Because I actually don't think I know anybody Black who didn't see Black Panther in theater more than once. Like everybody I know saw it in theater more than once. just because you wanted to just feel that energy. And of course, I did love that this was your story. But the story about your Blackest Today in residency, it was just another one of these moments where I could see it. I could say, you know what? Yep, I had that experience too. And, this is salient, obviously, because right now many of us are feeling the pain and loss of Chadwick Boseman, who starred as T'Challa, the king, and what he did for us in that moment, how we looked at that big screen and we saw all the things, like this beautiful thing, like this narrative that is almost like the narrative that could have been if our story had not been told for us by people who were not really in the most selfless space. That's the way I'll put that. And how that the way that we were defined when we got here, how it is just carried and carried and carried and carried. But to see that rewritten on that screen and then to hear your story about it, I'm so happy it was included. Almost like a little nod to all that good work that Chadwick did. So,
Yes. We also talked in some of our other episodes about, what home means to us. One of my favorite pieces was a young woman who talked about bringing her partner home. And that kind of conflict of, this is my home, this is a part of me, but there's this other part of me that isn't a part of that or doesn't get to be a part of that, and kind of this feeling of incompleteness. And I resonated so much with that because I feel like this is something I've been chasing my entire life, is being able to be my whole self.
Yeah. It is this dichotomy, right? The thing that you love, that has nurtured you and that has made you who you are, there's this internal struggle where you'd like to tease apart the parts that don't nicely fit into your life. You'd like everybody to play well together and for it to fit into a nice puzzle that you could frame and stick on the wall. That really resonated with me a lot. Actually, as I listened to that story, I thought about times when I was growing up. I remember I got bused to this magnet school in middle school. And that was my first time ever being around anybody that wasn't Black. My whole neighborhood was Black and Mexican. And this magnet school, I'm meeting like kids who are like white and Asian and Jewish and who have means and all this stuff. And I had a slumber party, and I remember really being troubled about commingling my friends, because, my neighborhood was pop locking, double dutching, and breakdancing. And my school was, none of that. And, I think that I had drunk the Kool-Aid of thinking that the things that were Black weren't as good. And I recall what I did, which I'm not proud of, which is brought these friends from my school to my house and didn't invite any of my friends from my neighborhood to my party to keep us separated because I didn't know how to do both. I didn't want my friends from my neighborhood to tease me for code switching. And I didn't want my friends from school to understand why I was being, air quotes, ghetto. And now that's why I'm so excited about where we are now, because I ain't doing none of that anymore. You're going to get all this Black girl magic. You're going to get Inglewood. You're going to get Tuskegee, Meharry. You're going to get Wakanda. Yeah, you're going to get all of that. It took me all this time to figure out that that's what people want anyway.
Yeah. I remember I was describing you to a friend of mine and talking about how much everybody loves you, which is awesome because it was like, she's also 1,000% Black. So I was just like,
that was a work in progress, yo. That was a work in progress.
Yeah, no, I feel you so much on that. It reminds me of one of our storytellers in the initial episode about George Floyd, who mentioned having to go to work after that and not really having anybody acknowledge or make space for what the storyteller was going through. And she mentioned this feeling that her worlds will not peacefully coexist. And I was just like, oh, God, yes. It's so true of how we just got to get indoctrinated into this system of beliefs that in order to be happy, in order to be successful, in order to be accepted, you got to strip down the parts of yourself that are not white heteronormative, and try to
Right.
be as close to that as
Right.
possible.
Right.
So,
I think the other thing about the home episode that I loved so much was that home for a lot of people was joy, right? It was like joy and home. So, whoo, was I so hyped when you opened up that episode and you start talking about being from Houston. What did you say? What did you talk about chopped and screwed music?
yeah,
Oh my
DJ
gosh.
Screw,
I was so
Slim
here for
Thug.
that. I was here for all of that. Because that is home, and that's it was a joyful way to kind of kick off that episode. Because even with the troubling parts of home, there's just so much beauty. I think another one of our storytellers talked about just just how home is just joy and safety and all the solace and good feelings that come from it. And I like that idea of us countering the narrative, because what's shown often on TV is chaos in Black families. People know that Black families have been historically fractured, right? Starting from the times of when we were enslaved and much later, if you look at mass incarceration. But there are a lot of very happy Black families that look a lot of ways. Some have just mom, some have just dad, some have big mama. Some have, all kinds of folks. But I loved how in that episode we were really able to, share with so many listeners, hey, home for us is really a lot like home for you. It's joy, it's happy, it's food that smells good. It's, somebody saying something crazy when you bring your boo home. You know what I mean? Like all that. It's like not... It was beautiful because some parts are unique to us, but it also showed our shared humanity. Because I'm so sure that there's somebody somewhere who listened to those episodes and thought like, dang, you know what? That sounds like my home.
Right? Absolutely. Speaking of, Blackness and authenticity, and I try not to rank the episodes like, they're all special in their own right. But that hair episode, girl.
Ma'am. That was the first one that we said we have to do. We're like, we must have an episode talking about this hair.
Man. Yeah. I would say that was probably one of the tougher editing sessions I remember, because everybody was just like, there were so many good stories, so many important stories. But, we were able to cultivate something magical in that, and like so many good pieces, from our storytellers who were men talking about being bald.
Oh, come on. Now, can I please just pause for a moment on that? I loved that story, partly because this Black man in my house who was real serious about his bald head. And that, I think people don't understand that the bald head industry, they make a lot of money. Like, that's a whole thing, right? So that his little patient said, yo, you got the dome, son. I could just hear it. It was so funny.
Man.
And I loved that. I love that. Because part of our hair experience is not having hair, too.
Yeah. Right? It is such an important aspect of our identity, and such a fraught one. I could spend all day talking about my hair journey. It's so much a part of who you are, and your self-confidence, and how you carry yourself. I loved Lash Nolan.
Oh.
Whew, all those bars. I was just like, man, let me play this back a couple of times. I might need this when I'm getting ready in the morning.
And it's funny, I'm sure our listeners are like, yo, they trying to de-identify people, but you cannot de-identify Lash. No, you can't de-identify Lash, because she's just like, you know her as soon as she, like, you hear the first utterance of her voice. So there's no way that we could do that anyway. So this is where I'm like, we just gonna say it.
I just put her whole name out there. My bad.
But she shares a lot on social media. I mean, expresses herself that way, and What's so dope about that freestyle that she offered us really was about how all these different looks that we have, and how eventually, professionalism has to be redefined, right? To get with where we are. Like, it's exhausting to try to learn how to be a doctor and how to learn the new guidelines on what to do for, a venous thromboembolism, but at the same time, be somebody that you are not. And what we see in the mirror, our outward appearance, is a big part of who we are. So, and I just loved how she kind of unpacked all the hairstyles. She's like,
Yeah, right.
yo, press out your puff puff. Go on, girl, with your puff puff. Because, you got a puff puff right now. You got a little puff puff right now.
Oh, yeah, I got a little high bun going on.
Yeah, that was a good one. And then, of course, I was absolutely brought to tears by this elegant story told by one of our storytellers of honoring her patient through braiding her hair. Like, when you look good, you feel good. And I think a lot of Black women, and maybe some Black men who heard this, have been in hospitals, have had that experience where they've looked at somebody who looked like them and saw their hair matted and said, man, let me just comb your hair for you. That was a real moment for me. The cadence also of the story, how measured her voice was as she told the story, it just honored the patient and the experience in such a special way. That was a real highlight for me.
I gotta admit, that's one of my worst fears, actually, is being laid up somewhere and having my hair looking crazy. It's
I'll come do your hair for you.
100%. If my hair's not looking right, y'all can let me go. It's okay.
Real talk.
No, but on the real, I think that part of what I'm learning in this time, because this is a time of reckoning for everybody, to be mindful of experiences that are different from ours, especially if you hold some element of power and privilege in the society.
Real talk.
And as physicians, that's us. No matter what other aspects of intersectional identities you may embody, as a physician, you have equally, if not more, responsibility to try to get proximate to the experiences of those who you are charged with caring for. Mm-hmm. And I think about, taking care of people who are sick, who are disabled, who are vulnerable, having never actually, by the grace of God and in my 32 years so far, really understood or experienced what that is like.
Yeah.
So, of course, we would be remiss to go through this series without acknowledging the ongoing pandemic happening concurrently with issues of anti-Black racism and racism in general. But COVID-19 felt like an important moment to acknowledge and pay homage to in the middle of the series, and recognizing that we're all healthcare workers who are in this fight. So I thought that was just a really incredible thing to honor and see through our stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved how one of our storytellers talked about what it means to be a nurse in this time. Again, just like, as we think about hierarchy in the world, as, the references I've made even to race, the same can really be said in hospitals sometimes, right? Where we don't take a moment to fully appreciate the contributions of everybody. And so I was really excited to hear our nursing colleagues say, listen, slow down and let me show you what's different right now about being a nurse in the time of COVID. You get to put on your PPE, come in there, take a little history and, move your stethoscope around the chest and then scoot on out. But I'm the person that's in and out of that room for a whole shift. And don't be an intensive care unit nurse like, this individual was, where you one-to-one with somebody for an entire shift. Mm-hmm. And that really, I've always appreciated our nursing staff, all of our whole team, PharmDs and dietitians and everybody. But I think that COVID and some of the stories that we heard amplified and was like an aha moment for me about the unique roles of every single person who is front line in this pandemic. And then so to think that on top of that, you're a nurse, and then on top of that, you are now getting mandated to do stuff that isn't what you signed up to do right now. It happened to some doctors, but not with the frequency that it's happened to our nursing staff. So I appreciated that story.
I feel like we will be reflecting and unpacking this pandemic for a long time. It's definitely reshaped the way I view myself within this healthcare system and the role that I play. So, moving on to our episode on becoming. And I love the title because it means so many different things. And all of us have these phenomenal stories and these journeys. And I, for one, just felt very, very connected and very blessed with this episode because my mom got to be on it.
Yes.
And knowing that her story so much is intertwined with my own. And, it's just a little snippet of her journey into becoming a nurse. But that was really what put me on the path to becoming a doctor as well.
Wow, that was I thought that was another tough editing one too, because there were just so many really special stories that we heard. Obviously, we can't think of the word becoming now without thinking of everybody's BFF, Michelle Obama. But there's also this quote that I absolutely love from this author, Carol Dweck, that says, "Becoming is better than being." But I think that our stories in that episode really underscore that, right? Nobody ever really arrives. And the people who think they have, they're annoying. Right? I mean, isn't that true?
Right, just say it correctly. Yes, it's true. Don't sugarcoat it.
Yes, it's true. Like, if you think you arrived, you're annoying. And the people that are always, like, on their hustle and trying to get there, no matter what that is, whether it's figuring out how to do a new thing, take on a new task or anything like that, or this trying to become a doctor. It's such a moving target, and it's always more exciting to talk about the process than it is to talk about when you get there.
No, that's so true. Like, the moment we think we've arrived, that's when things, I feel like, can get dicey, especially as people in healthcare. There's always something new to be learned, not just about the body, but about people. We're in the business of taking care of people, and people evolve, and we also have to evolve. Otherwise, we can't change our society into a place that'll be equitable for everybody.
For sure.
But of course, part of that process of becoming, especially in these professional identities that we embody, means that we might find ourselves standing out from time to time, being the one chocolate chip in the cookie, as I had one attending describe to me during her process of being a Black woman in medicine.
Or the speck of pepper in the country gravy.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. But this episode was definitely another top one for me. That story about starting off as a dancer in ballet. And, to put yourself out there to try out for a company, and, you're already nervous and really just, thinking about the dance itself, and then to have a comment like, "You're too distracting."
What hurt me so badly about that story is that our storyteller was young. I believe she was probably like 12 or a tween or something like that.
Yeah.
And as she brings us into the story, right, it had not occurred to her yet it occurred to her that it was a challenging thing to do it, right, to take on this task. And her perception of her performance is that she had done her best and that she was at least in the running because a few cuts had been made and she had made it, along. But that person robbed her of her innocence. There's a moment that, Ashley, I'm a mom, right? And I can put my finger on the moment when that happened to both of my sons, when they were robbed of their innocence, where this idea of who they are and their position in the world. And there's this moment that comes along that says, you're not the ideal. You're not the ideal at all. You know, one of my kids, when he was little and early in elementary school, I was talking to a mom outside of school one day, and the mom was like, "Oh yeah, we should get the kids together for a play date." And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And I get my son in the car, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm gonna set up a play date for you and this kid." And my son looked at me and said, "I don't think I want to go over there for a play date. We could play at school, but I don't want to go over there for a play date because he said that black people are bad and they don't work hard." And the thing is, my son was like in the maybe first or second grade at the time. And the only way that he sort of inherently knew around that point that it wouldn't be safe for him to be at that house where those ideas were percolating. So as long as I'm on neutral territory, like we could play at school, but I'm not going in there.
Yeah.
And you know, it was a hard thing, but that happens, you know, in black families all the time. There's this point where your kid is just like doing their thing. And wow, she was pretty fortunate to have made it that long, because 11 is kind of old for that to happen, or 12. But I do think that is a unique lived experience for black people in this country, to have this moment where it is brought to you in relief, like, yo, you are not what we have in mind. You are a deviation from the norm. You are other.
Yeah. And the fact that, you know, on rounds, having this happen again as a medical student, her response being, you know, thank God I had parents who instilled in me that I am enough, that this isn't it. You know, what people's perceptions and limitations of you are. I could relate to that, and it was tough, but such an important and beautiful story.
Yeah, it was a lot in that, you know, that episode that was beautiful, because standing out is not always a negative thing, right? You can stand out in ways that are really special.
Yes.
Oh, you know what? That also makes me think. Sorry, I got hyped there for me. I thought about our friend who spoke to us from North Dakota. Lord have mercy. Like, okay, I'm not sure if she is actually still there, but she was from North Dakota and talked about the lived experience of growing up as a black woman in North Dakota. And when I say I was today years old, or at least that day years old, when I knew that somebody black was in North Dakota. And it was dope too, because like not only was she from North Dakota, like she was kicking all the like info about North Dakota, but with a little bit of like black woman flavor on it. It was dope.
Right?
I loved it.
Black people can be black anywhere.
Even if they're not raised by black people. It's like, it's just like, my whole family is basically not black, but like she was giving all the black girl magic all through the recording. It was dope.
Yeah. Loved it. What a beautiful perspective. And also the complexity of what family and home is. And so I loved hearing that perspective. Loved it. And so talking a little bit about, you know, our second to last episode on touch, what it means to have the laying on of hands that's so intimately entwined with our profession.
Okay, look, can I start?
Yes.
While you gather
go.
your thoughts. Okay. You know what? There was one of our storytellers told this story about examining a patient, and the patient was like, yo, you're the first person. I mean, the patient didn't say it like that, but
I'm sure it was something close, you know.
This is my first time that a doctor has touched me. And, you know, I remember just being like, man, that is so sad. Because obviously, like, what does touch mean? Like to the patient, does it mean like where you took me out of my clothes and listened to me with your scope on my skin, where you palpated my body with your bare hands? What does that mean? But regardless of what the patient's experience had been up until then, that any patient could be fully grown and have been in an environment for a while and perceives that they have not been touched. That is sad.
I mean, particularly when we think about people that we're comfortable with our friends, our family, like there's, there's an embrace, there's a kiss, there's a hug, there's a handshake. There's some very human element that comes with touch. And especially in medicine, that has become more and more dehumanizing. And the way that we approach our patients and the way that we do our day-to-day work, the push for efficiency and automation and electronic medical records, it just builds more and more distance. And particularly now, again, in the backdrop of COVID-19, literally not really being able to touch people, it exacerbates that truth so much more. I think probably the most moving story of that for me was the storyteller who was talking about their grandmother. And I am very close to my grandma. And so, I'm not a huge crier, I will, but I was moved to tears immediately on hearing this story. I was like, that is me. And so I thought that was just so beautiful, the way she describes that relationship, and also like how she noticed after her grandmother had gotten sick, that the touch was different.
The story that you just referenced about a beloved grandmother and just feeling those hugs and what they mean. I mean, it just lets you realize there's a whole spectrum of touch that we're missing right now, right? It's from the deep hugs that you get from a grandmama to just those, those nurses and patient transporters and folk that you see every day that just show you love that in ways that involve touch. You also said you're not a big crier. And did you know that I cry every day? Every single day I cry. There's not a day probably in the last 50 years, because I'm going to be 50 in like a week, that I haven't cried. I cry every day. I haven't cried yet today.
There's
Oh, no,
plenty
yes,
of time.
I did. Yes, I did. I did cry today already. I'm sorry. So I already got one in today, but I can get in a few more if you want.
Yeah, no, the day is young.
One of our storytellers was a rotating student in emergency medicine, and they were doing sort of the FAST study, right, where you learn how to do ultrasounds in trauma. And the medical students were serving as the models for learning how to do these ultrasounds. And this particular medical student, who's a Black man, was lying on this table as emergency medicine residents ran an ultrasound probe over his abdomen. And the teacher pointed out that, oh my gosh, this is the exact body that you're going to be working on. This is a perfect specimen, which in a way, obviously the teacher caught themselves while talking and recognized that really what they were saying is, this is the target, right? This is the target. So like, while we aren't ideal for ballet, how much does it suck that you're ideal for teaching somebody how to look for free blood in an abdomen after a gunshot? That's bugged out, man.
And it is just so, it's so natural, He didn't even realize he was saying what he was saying until he was about to say it. And then you just kind of brush it off and move on, similar to the attending who, told the medical students from the ballet story that, you're just a distraction. You're just gonna stay outside the room next time. It's become so commonplace to see Black bodies in that way, as distractions, as commodities, as expendable.
And I saw that as like this quiet, painful narrative that sometimes is experienced by Black people, that happens like right out in the open, but people don't realize that it's happening. You know what I mean? Like where, like if you have lived it, you see it, right? But if you haven't lived it, it could just fly under your radar. I actually wanted to backtrack to something that made me think about that very thing, which was when we had the COVID episode, Ashley, there was a storyteller who talked about this experience of having an ex-boyfriend call and say, that the ex's parent was sick with COVID in the hospital. And obviously it was a complex story, right? Because it really weaved in all the, the pain of a breakup and all of that. But to me, what it amplified is this other quiet narrative that's happening as a lived experience for Black people, which is that COVID-19, like you see the charts that say, oh, it disproportionately affects people of color, but we have real stories to connect to that data. Somebody on the other end of a phone call calling us to say, my mama is on the way to the ICU, or my daddy is prone in an ICU right now, or what do you think about, Desivir, or what you think about all of these medications and all these trials, because I could go through my cell phone and run out of fingers to count on at how many direct, asks I've gotten about people who are acutely affected by this. And so that story really resonated a lot with me too, because I think that though, I haven't had an ex call me up to say such a thing, what I have had is long lost friends who think of me as the doctor in the family and who haven't talked to me in a long time, who are like, yo, my people are on death's door with this thing. And I just think it's less hypothetical for a lot of us.
I know that sentiment of being the gateway between, Black communities, Black families, and medicine for so long. Just the distrust, the misunderstanding, the miscommunication, the lack of communication, and having to, play that role as mediator, even for an ex-partner, when you're still grieving that loss, to step into that role. I can only imagine the difficulty there. The way we chose to close out against this backdrop was talking about new life and birth and what that means, especially for our community. I was thinking a lot kind of existentially about how throughout years of oppression that Black people continue to live and continue to thrive, and how birth is kind of like a very poignant manifestation of that. And the mix of the realities of Black women giving birth today, and what that means, especially giving birth to sons, and also daughters in a society such as this. It was a lot, but also very beautiful and hopeful.
I was in love with so much of that episode. You know what? I think there were pieces that really, like the kind of things that make you snap your fingers and go, yes, I feel that. Yes. One piece was one of our storytellers talking about finding out that she was having a son. And this storyteller, one of the complexities of being who she is that she described herself as somebody who self-described as mixed, and then disclosed that the father of her child is her husband, who is white, and wondered what this child would be like. One, would this child be safe? But then this sort of tug of war, right, of wanting the kid to look and seem Black at the same time. And I'm like, man, that is such a true thing for us, right? Where you have this piece of you that you like, I want my kids to be able to seamlessly integrate into this world that they have to be in. But then I also want them to have their hair naughty, and I want them to walk into spaces and just own who they are. And I want them to just be like knowing who they are. But then I want them to be able to kind of go somewhere else and it not be too distracting. You know what I mean? Kind of like back to what our other storyteller said. And
Yeah.
that's a tricky thing, right? Because you want that really, you want both. And the two sometimes don't play well together. And I just thought that was an interesting thing because I'm sure that there are people who think about how difficult it is to be a black man and say, why in the devil would you be wishing and hoping that your black son comes out looking like a brother, and not ambiguous,
Yes.
But I get that. I could see how she wanted that. Like I want him, and this is probably me putting words in her mouth, but a piece of me was like, maybe she wants him to look so black that he has no alternative but to embrace blackness, right? Versus potentially, because she said, would he pass? He could be somebody who phenotypically does not look black at all and has the option to embrace that piece.
Yeah. And that option is not always easy. Yeah, no, I loved that piece and the complexity of grappling with having a son. And I believe she found out she was pregnant on the day that George Floyd was murdered,
Yeah.
which, really just kind of shapes that whole experience. And
Yeah.
that level of anxiety, I can only imagine, it just seems like there's something special, both frightening and beautiful about being a Black mother.
But what's crazy? I can say this as a Black mother. But I actually, this is, and what I'm gonna say is something that you don't have to be a Black mother to relate to. There's like a fellowship of suffering that Black people have that gets infused into our identity in this way that it is a hard thing to imagine, like letting go of ever, right? Like when I think about a world where there is no racism, then with that goes the fellowship of suffering, right? Which is just an interesting concept, if you will. But there's a piece sort of built into us, right? When we think about the atrocities that our ancestors have experienced, it just gets like built into us to struggle. And there's like a muscle in us that is ready to do it. And almost a piece of me, it's crazy, like a piece of me likes when I get to use the muscle, because it's in me. It's like if it connects me to my ancestors. I'm like, yeah, damn it, God damn it, we gonna fight. You know what I mean? We
Yeah.
here. You got me confused if you think I'm about to back down off of this. So, it's weird. Like when my older son was born and he started growing older and he was so brown, he's so much browner than me. And I was like, yeah, I got a chocolate baby, But his world is gonna be harder, But yet I'm ready. I want to fight. Yeah, it's crazy. It's complex, man. It's complex
Right.
being Black.
Right. But I feel especially, for me personally, I think, from a spiritual standpoint, it is, to me, my belief is that brokenness is something that is more spiritually connected to God, or at least the biblical narrative of pain and suffering, at least in some ways, being a conduit to transformation and being more than what this world would have you be otherwise. So I feel that so much, and knowing that, throughout the suffering, particularly with my own identity is coming into my own as a Black woman, especially as a Black queer woman, the support of, my family, my colleagues, but especially my best friend, who is basically my sister, who went through residency with me, kind of saw me becoming and into the woman that I am now. I couldn't have done that without her. And it made me think a lot about your story and just kind of that sisterhood that many of us are blessed to embrace, and what that was like for you to go through that moment and have her roll up right outside of Grady.
It's crazy, right? I mean, yeah, it was a beautiful conflict of interest. That's what we always call it. And, you know, if you even intertwine it, that story with another one of our stories, one of our storytellers talked about the person who sent an email saying, like, I see you doing all this work in disparities, and it makes me think of Esther, and the scripture from the book of Esther that says, you know, perhaps you were born for a time such as this. It makes me think about like this woman, right, who our paths crossed at Meharry Medical College in 1992, and then would later cross in Atlanta, Georgia, where she would, you know, we would reconnect and she would become my OB. And, you know, you wonder if like this little point in time in 1992 when we met in the parking lot on the first day of medical school, maybe it was all for this time, right? And, you know, as I think about all of this, you know, this whole project and us being here doing this, talking about this, like this almost 50-year-old Black mama, and you, this smart, brilliant, queer, unapologetic Black woman that I admire, and us getting to like do this together. Then I backtrack to us in that meeting at UCSF in 2019, and then think to now and think like, wow, you know, it's kind of like that same book of Esther moment. Like perhaps, you know, we are here for a time such as this. We are doctors who have lived this life and who are experiencing uniquely two pandemics. One, the old pandemic that nobody was paying attention to, but we were feeling, right? Racism. And then this pandemic that's got my kids on virtual school and making my life miserable, among other things, miserable, right? But it is interesting, right, to think about it in terms of like this, like since you mentioned kind of spirituality, like this moment in time, it is nice to know that we are chronicling what it is like and the meaning of being Black and in healthcare at a time such as this. Because this is people do say unprecedented. Now the racism piece, that's precedented. But the racism commingling with this here COVID pandemic, that is unprecedented.
And I guess for me, it speaks to the importance of putting our stories out there. For our colleagues who both have been aware and aligned, alongside those who are really coming into this consciousness for the first time, that yes, you have to do the work of, you know, reading the books, looking at lists A through Z of how to not be racist. But it is worth noting that having that knowledge that is void of actual experience, it's hard to fully know what you don't know or come into this work without at least some proximity to what it feels like to be on the receiving end of these types of atrocities, and not just the brutality that we see on screen that gets hyped up in the media, but it's the day-to-day lived experience of being Black, being a person of color, being some other that you know doesn't fit with what's considered valuable or normal in our society.
For us to really make a dent in all of this, we have to get proximate. And that's what's dope about our stories. We have people in the privacy of their homes, their cars, their walks in the park, their, you know, playground moments, their camping trips, allow a whole world of people to get proximate, to get into our lives and say, you know, this is what it's like right now, you know, to be Black. Not just this is what it's like to be Black. This is what it's like to be Black right now in the time of two pandemics. This is what it's like. Come on in and take a look. I'm not going to code switch. I'm not going to water it down. I'm not going to give you something different. This is what it's like. And I love the way that you put that, Ashley, about how, you know, if you read a stack of books, but you are not proximate, that there's nothing to humanize the thing that you're doing then you ain't gonna get there. You're not gonna get there. But if you see somebody pull out a gun after 3 minutes and shoot a man in his back 7 times while his kids are in the car, if you're proximate to me, you will see my sons. You will see my husband. If you heard our storytellers, you will see what the world loses in terms of potential when all of these things happen. And that's, I think, the thing that I love so much about a story, because, a story just stays with you, even if you don't want it to stay with you. We need something to live in your heart while you do the work. It's not enough for me to show you a video of somebody doing something bad and for you to have this sort of fleeting empathy and this feelings advocacy, right, as Ibram Kendi calls it. I'm ready for you to have it live in your heart so that you can't unsee and you can't uncare. And that's the problem, because people been uncaring. People care, but then they can uncare and keep it pushing. And I think stories haunt you.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, when I first agreed to this, after talking with Emily, I had no real depth of understanding of the whole production crew behind the Nocturnist. And not only that, between our amazing podcast producer, John, the audio engineer, our phenomenal medical students who took time out of their entire summers to help us go through so many stories and, make the difficult decisions around who to cut. But we also commissioned an amazing Black illustrator, Ashley Floréal, who put together these tiles and the artwork that just brings to life this whole series. And I can't wait to hang all that art in my office.
Yes.
And then
those beats, Janae E. Because we needed some soul to open this thing up. This process of all of us working together, it's been a real journey and a pleasure for me.
Yeah. And not the very least of which, the over 200 Black voices in healthcare who signed on to do this project, who trusted us to share, and these very real, authentic, vulnerable stories. And it pains me that we weren't able to scratch the surface of all the amazing stories that were submitted. But I just cannot say enough how grateful and proud I am to be a part of this community of folks who shared pieces of themselves in order to bring this gift to the world.
Yeah. Continue to tell your stories, man. Continue. The world needs it.
This has been The Nocturnist, Black Voices in Healthcare. Thank you to our visionary sponsors, the California Medical Association and the California Healthcare Foundation, for making this project possible. I want to thank our core team, executive producer Kimberly Manning, the Nocturnist founder Emily Silverman, podcast producer Adelaide Papazoglou, sound engineer John Oliver, and medical students Lauren Wooten and Rafaela Posner. Thanks also to executive producer Allie Block, program manager Rebecca Groves, and communications specialist Cora Becker. Our illustrations are by Ashley Floréal. Our theme song is by Janae E. If you want to continue supporting the Nocturnist work in storytelling, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or make a gift on our website or Patreon page. If you'd like to add your voice to one of the Nocturnist's future projects, visit our website at thenocturnist.com. Never forget, Black lives matter, Black health matters, and Black stories matter.